Hi and welcome. Thank you for coming to my talk about web accessibility. I will be your guide today and take you to the world of web accessibility. We'll explore and go on a little journey, so buckle up. Before we get started, I just want to quickly introduce myself and how I got into web accessibility. So my name is Josefine. My pronouns are she, her, and I got into web development from what I guess you could call a non-traditional background. So originally I studied languages, I worked in communications, and a couple of years ago I joined the web development bootcamp and landed my first job as a front-end developer in a digital agency. And basically right after I started, the client I was working for had to implement web accessibility in order to comply with legal requirements from different markets they were active in. It concerned a large legacy code base, many different stakeholders. We only had a really short amount of time to get it right, and it was a new topic for most of the people on the project, even more experienced developers. So you could say it was interesting. But I was really excited about it because I love learning new things, and I was very motivated to do something that I felt like had a positive impact for a large community of people. So I was hooked right away. These days I work as a developer relations engineer at Storyblock. So Storyblock is a fully remote company. They are providing a headless CMS. They're also hiring, so if you are looking for a job in that field, be sure to check them out or just get in touch with me if you have any questions. And the fully remote part, apart from my job of course, is something that I'm quite excited about, because that means I could literally work from anywhere, maybe travel a little bit, and you see later where that comes into play. But enough about me, let's dive right in and start our journey. So I will start by providing a little bit of background information for context here, and then we will dive right into the more practical things and how to get started. So, what is web accessibility and why is it important? Web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and implemented in a way that people with disabilities can use them and participate on the web equally. It's also a basic human right as defined by the United Nations. If you're wondering if that's something for you or for the people you want to visit your website, maybe let this number sink in. So, based on a World Report on Disability by the World Health Organization, worldwide it's estimated that over 15% of the population experience some form of disability, and that's over 1 billion people. And of course, it is difficult to measure the experience of disability. Global data is really hard to collect, true, but even if it's just a ballpark, 1 billion is quite a strong number in my opinion. And especially as we are growing older as a society, this number is likely to get larger. I'm hoping that even if you are looking at this from a business perspective, the sheer amount of people that are affected and their massive spending power convinces you that this is relevant also for you. And if that's not enough, let's have a look at the different potential users and people who benefit from web accessibility, because that's basically all of us. So it's of course people with different disabilities, so like physical, auditory, cognitive, neurological, speech, or visual disabilities. It could also be people without disabilities, so somebody who's entering the internet from a smartphone or maybe a different device that has a small screen, so a smartwatch or a TV or something. Then older people, as I mentioned, with changing abilities due to aging, and let's face it, that's going to affect all of us someday. And then also people with what is called in this table temporary disabilities. So maybe you have a broken arm or you just lost your glasses. Or if you are in bright sunlight, for example, can't see the screen properly, or you have slow internet connection, those are all things where web accessibility comes in handy, as we're later gonna see. So lots of people affected by this. What does it look like in practice then? It could mean providing transcripts or captions for videos, being open to different input methods like mouse, keyboard, and speech commands, for example. It could mean compatibility with different platforms, including assistive technology, or something like explaining unfamiliar terms and not just assuming everybody has the same base knowledge. speaking of unfamiliar terms, I just want to get some phrases and terms out of the way before we get started. So A11Y, that stands for accessibility, and the 11 is the 11 letters between the A and the Y, sometimes pronounced ally. Then we have the WCAG, so that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That is a shared international standard, basically a set of rules and levels of accessibility. So the A, AA, and AAA. The latter is the most inclusive. These are the three different levels, and if you decide to comply by them or maybe follow the law that says, okay, you need to comply with the AA standard of accessibility, you know where to go and which rules to follow. So that's quite handy. And the WAI, so the Web Accessibility Initiative, they are providing all this documentation, providing all these rules. So that's a very good source if you are unsure about certain rules, for example, good place to start and double check. Now, we got a common ground. Let's dive into more concrete topics on where you can get started. We'll have a look at 3 different areas of web accessibility. So those are the ones where the most common issues originate in terms of web accessibility. And afterwards, we'll have a look at real life examples and check, or we'll have a look at how to check for these issues as well. Just a disclaimer up front, so I will mention some tools. These are literally just personal preference, so I have no affiliation with them, and I love learning about new tools, so if you have recommendations, I'd be delighted to learn about them. The first thing we're going to talk about is color contrast. So color and contrast are vital to web accessibility, and this is one of the #1 issues that goes wrong, basically. Here, the difference between the perceived luminance or brightness is compared between the background and the foreground. So that's what it could look like, for example, or you want to make sure that the content is perceivable. Contrast between text and background are sufficient. And if I say sufficient, I am now talking about the AA standard, and they recommend 4.5 to 1 as a ratio for the color difference between background and foreground. You see on the left, so you have 1.5 to 1. That is like very low difference, I guess, and 21 to 1, that would be black writing on white background, so that's the highest contrast you can get there. And high contrast helps people with visual disabilities or visual impairments to see better. And something you might want to consider, of course, a minimum of contrast is good for everybody to see. Depending on your audience, something like really, really bright colors that can be very distracting for people, for example, with reading disabilities. So if that's something that is important to you or your user group, that's something to consider when selecting the colors. The next topic I want to talk about is keyboard accessibility. So many users with motor disabilities rely on a keyboard. It's also really helpful to have keyboard accessibility in place for assistive technology or modified keyboards, and blind users typically use their keyboard for navigation. And it's really important for a general user experience. So it's very fast and efficient. Like power users, you can use your keyboard to just be a little bit quicker. And what is here really important, and I'm going to show you in our practical example a little bit later on, is that you can tap to all the elements that are interactive, and they should all be reachable through the tab key. It's very important that you can not only tap there, but also tab away. So you don't want to trap your users in a place that they can't get out of with a keyboard, but just by using a mouse, for example. There's some like very specific cases, like in a modal maybe, where it might be useful, but those are edge cases, and generally you want to make sure people can get out where they got in. Then you want to make sure that the tab order is logical, so just like you would read on your page, depending of course on your where you're from, or the language you're reading in, but you want to, in English, that would be from left to right and then down. You want to make sure you have all the functionality by keyboard that you have through other methods. So if you have information that you're providing by hover, make sure the user gets this information also if they're using the keyboard to navigate your site. And you want to make sure focus is always visible. So you want to, well, users need to know where they are on the page, and that can be done by focus. So I need to see which element is currently selected. That's very important to make sure you have enough color contrast there, you don't disable it. And our last overall topic is Semantic HTML. Here we're basically laying the foundation for all things web accessibility. So Semantic HTML means we're using the elements for their given purpose. So that could be, for example, an H1 is our main headline and the most important content. An A tag represents a link, a UL, I know there's a list coming. All of these different elements have a very specific meaning, and by using them the way they were intended to, we give the page structure rather than just representation. Of course, you could use some CSS and JavaScript to make the elements look and function the way you want it to, but there are many good reasons to rather not do that, but use Semantic HTML. And like I already said, so we're providing structure and meaning, which gives orientation for the screen readers. It comes with some basic default styles and inherent functionality like built-in keyboard accessibility. So the button that you see there at the bottom, I can tap to that. It's already interactive. I can select it with my enter key and follow the button and start that action, for example. All things that you could, of course, manually build in if you wanted to, but it's much less work really and easier to use the built-in functionalities. You have a standard look that you can overwrite, but you already got something to work with, so that it comes in quite handy. You have different cursor styles. It's also really important to indicate for users that maybe there's an action that can be triggered. And it helps structure the code if you use Semantic HTML, so it's easier to maintain and cheaper, increases SEO and performance. And search engine crawlers like Google's, they use very different kind of approach as the screen readers. So your page is going to be ranked better if you go with the basic Semantic HTML guidelines. So buckle up, we're getting started on our little journey. We have a common ground to start from, and now it's time to take it to the real world. In the real world, there has been a lot of stuff going on and still is, lots of restrictions, a lot of pandemic-related news, and it's been quite difficult to travel. And so if you're anything like me, you probably still spend some time on traveling websites, making plans just in case, and playing with a lot of what ifs. And it's become quite easy and convenient to play around, to make plans, to organize online. But if you're dependent on web accessibility, that might look a little bit different. So let's have a look. We'll have a look at Lonely Planet's German website. If you don't speak German, don't worry. That's not what we're here to have a look at. Just a little disclaimer. So I used to be a massive fan of Lonely Planet when I was younger, and despite some of the controversies on the news, I don't want to deny that. But that's not the place to discuss this, so it's not about throwing shade at all. I just want to illustrate some of the things in practice. Just show where there might be room for improvement, and we'll have a look at their website together. Okay, so the first thing I would do here is just visually check a little bit what it looks like already. I can see, for example, here there is something written, but I can't identify what because of a lack of color contrast. And here at the bottom it gets a little bit lighter, for example, if I hover, but in the unhovered state this is quite difficult to read as well. And apart from that, visually, at a first glance, it looks okay. Now, if I wanted to check and go a bit further and check the color contrast, I have a little tool here that I can use. It's a color contrast checker. There are many different ones out there. And I could go to the section in question, select the background color, for example, and then pick something that will represent the foreground. So like a lighter, really hard to identify here. Maybe something like, here we go. something like this. And we see we're not passing the test. So to fulfill AA standards, we would have to have 4.5. We now have 3.2, and you see here we're failing all the different levels. And you could use this whenever you're unsure if you are passing or failing a specific requirement. Tools like these come in quite handy. Also when creating a color theme for your website, maybe checking beforehand. That would be save you a lot of time and trouble. Now, if I'm done here with the color contrast, the next thing I would do is tab through my site to see what the tab order is like, if I can reach all the elements. You see we're starting here at the top corner, and I used the tab key to navigate. Now I lost the focus and I'm unsure where we are right now. Continue tabbing, and then you see here I'm going backwards, which is not the direction I would usually read in, so that's not ideal. Now we're on the button and moving through the different teasers here. This looks okay-ish. There's also a tool to check for this, so it's called Tab Ally. I can run it really quickly, and it's gonna visualize how the tab order works on our site. Super handy, especially if you have a large page with a lot of interactive elements and you just want to make sure you cover everything, not just the things that you go through manually. So here we see it visualized, the number 0. 1, it also shows me what kind of element this is. So now I can see, okay, this is an input element that we were unable to identify. The different navigational elements here, which are apparently links. Then the link here, which kind of looks like a button. It's completely skipping over our headline, going through the different elements here. And then here at the products, we see, oddly enough, it's skipping to every second one. So that would also be something worth investigating if we were to pursue this any further. So I'm going to clear this search. And now the last thing I would want to do is turn on VoiceOver. So our assistant on Mac. I will turn it on. Please don't be distracted. It talks. It's going to read out the content like, a screen reader does. And I'll turn it off in a second again. So bear with me.
VoiceOver on system preferences. Accessibility with Brave. Lonely Planet. Reisafara for individual reason. Brave. Window. Zealand location Suchen. Edit text. Link. Zeal. List. Link. Magazine, link. Newslet, link. Forum, link. MEHR Erferen. List 1 item. U, link. Costa Rica, link. Costa Rica, link. Unterwegs auf dem Kontinent Europa to go. VoiceOver off.
Okay, so I turned it off again. There were a couple of things quite interesting. So apparently here at the bottom, the input that we just saw, it reads out as text edit. So then we know we can edit the text there. Here for the navigation, we had unfortunately no indication whatsoever that we are in a navigation. It somehow completely skipped over this button, if I'm not mistaken, and then read out the individual links. Something quite interesting happened here. So it read out the mehr erfahren, so learn more. It read that out letter by letter. So it spelled it out because it's capitalized. And that's something you want to avoid, because the screen reader might think if something is written in all caps that this is an abbreviation. It wants to make it easier for the user to understand, and then goes wrong there. So if you're just capitalizing something for the looks of it, for example, that's something you want to make sure to avoid confusion. And we did not go through the images as far as I know. So we can check here. So it did not identify our headline, and you can see here that that is because it's a div. It's a div with a class title, or you can see the headline in here. So that's not ideal, because regardless of the settings, the screen reader is not going to be able to know that this is maybe important content for the website. Also, when we're looking at this, I thought it was a button. It's actually a link and wrapped in a class button. And then if we have a look at the images that are used here, you see the alt tag is empty. That is also something that can be a quick fix, right? So adding meaningful alternative attributes to the images is going to provide a lot of very helpful information for screen reader users, for example. And then we could continue like this. So there is some room for improvement for sure, but I have to say I have been a bit picky. So the English-speaking website lonelyplanet.com is doing a lot better in terms of accessibility. So it looks like they're working on this. And again, I don't want to point any fingers or anything. I just wanted to use this as a real-life example of a page that I sometimes use, or there is still some places that can be improved. Now, another example is the Airbnb website, where I was quite positively surprised. We'll close this for now. So if we have a first look already, you can see that here the contrast is already quite stark. So we have white on black, really bright red. So these are all the things that already stand out. I feel like I don't even need a color picker to tell me whether this is enough contrast. I just want to show you another tool really quickly, which is the Web Disability Simulator. And here you can simulate different experiences that people might have on your website. So I could go to site and, for example, select total color blindness. And you see here, the experience is completely different. It does look, less bright, of course, but you can still see everything as far as I can tell for now that you wanted to see. I could also go with, for example, red-green color blindness, I think is quite common. And again, looks very different than the original, but everything is perceivable. And you get an idea of what this looks like. Of course, this is not 100% accurate, but it gives you a first impression of what different kinds of people experience your website like. The last one I want to show you here with the disability simulator is Sunshine. So you see here, this is quite common, the brightness goes up, so it's a lot harder to perceive the images. Still sort of readable, I guess. Here we can't make out the text anymore, but this is something you want to keep in mind when creating this color scheme for your website, that things stay visible as long as possible, basically. Very useful tool, also very interesting to play around with. There's a lot more in there that I would really recommend checking out. Okay, so next thing I would do is check the tab order and just use the tab key to go through my site. The first thing you see here is that it says skip to content. So this is a skip link, and that's quite helpful. So it basically says, especially if you are a power user, you use the site a lot, you don't want to click through all the navigational items every single time. So the skip link here is something that has been implemented specifically for keyboard users, and you can use this, skip to the main content if you now press enter, and don't go through every individual item. That is very helpful and really good user experience in my opinion. But if I continue tabbing, I just go through the header as I normally would, and you see the focus style is quite clear, coherent. I see where the focus is, tabbing through these items, and now going into the travel guide here, selecting the different buttons, so it's quite clear where I am. All right, if I were to now inspect a couple of things on the site, so for example here, if we're looking at this headline, you see they use the headline 1 to make sure everybody knows this is the most important headline of the site. Same goes for here, this is the headline 2. So you have a hierarchy that gives the page structure, and you can identify what's going on where. Okay, so now if we were to go down and inspect one of the images here, you can see it's a div. So that's something that could be criticized, because we do want to use the correct element for the representative element. It has the role image, however, and it does have an ARIA label with an alternative text to provide some context for people who cannot see what's going on in this image. ARIA labels are labels which basically allow you to extend the native HTML and change it in a way or change the way in which the elements are translated into the accessibility tree, so the structure that is used by the assistive technology, for example. And here you see the ARIA label, which labels this image, and ARIA busy. ARIA busy does, for example, let you know if the content is finished loading. So if it was still loading, I would get an ARIA busy true, and now that it's done loading, I get the ARIA busy false. Another place you can see an ARIA label is actually at the top. I will just switch this to the bottom and go up to our date picker. And now if I select here the date picker, you see here it has the ARIA expanded set to false. So this means there is an element that is currently not expanded, and if I click here, you see it switches to true, which means there is a place where I can go now and go further. So this gives some context for screen reader users, which is quite handy. Okay, so we saw Airbnb did some things right. There's always room for improvement, but I just wanted to show an example that very positively surprised me. So what are you waiting for? Of course, it's the best way to include accessibility right from the start of your project. It's cheaper, it's less work, less time, less resources. Sure. However, it's not impossible to start making improvement later, and it's so important. If you're not doing it to have a positive impact on your community or make your website accessible for more people, it's really important to also consider legal requirements. So in some countries, it's already a requirement to comply with accessibility AA standards, for example, for organizations of a specific size. And if it's not in your country yet, it might come very soon. So better be prepared than sorry afterwards. And of course, you're excluding a large user group, and that's excluding revenue. So if you need the business side of things, there you got it. If I did convince you that it's something to get started on rather sooner than later, there are a couple of things that you can do so you don't have to wait any longer. You could, for example, return to your code with semantics in mind and check if there's maybe a more precise element that you can use instead of a div. Investigate the intended purpose. So what's the difference between an all article and an aside, for example? What's the case on your project? Make sure you include alt tags, correct input type, add the labels. All these things are very handy, not only for people who depend on web accessibility, but for everybody. So input type, for example, if I want users to put in their phone number and the input type is number on mobile, it's going to switch right away to the number pad, and that's just going to save so much time and trouble for our users. So just general usability, really. You could go to your browser and turn off CSS. It might not be pretty, but you can then see if the structure is logical, for example, and it might help visualize for you where there is some room for improvement. You could also try one of the many color picker or color contrast checker tools that are out there. Try to navigate your site only by using a keyboard and make sure all the focus stars are visible, the tab order is correct. It's actually possible to navigate your project or your site via keyboard, and just give it a go for like half an hour maybe, or make it a challenge to, for one day, only use a keyboard and see what that does and discuss with your colleagues. And then you could try using different screen readers. So if you're using a Mac, for example, VoiceOver should be pre-installed. You can just play around with it, get familiar, and find another way to experience your website. That's already the end of my talk. I hope it was helpful to you, and please keep in mind that in the case of web accessibility, 10% is better than nothing. It's an ongoing process and every small step counts. So get started today. And if you have any questions about web accessibility or anything else that I covered today, please feel free to reach out. and I'm very much looking forward to getting in touch with you. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day. Thank you so much.